My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I was not born into a palace. I was not raised among diplomats or scholars of power. I was a soldier before I became a president. And even now, I still think like a soldier who understands that life can change in a single night. I speak today not only to Muslims, not only to Christians, not only to the leaders of the Sahel, but to the wider world, and especially to those who believe in God and care about the moral weight carried by those who govern. Many of you watching are older than I am. You have seen empires rise and fall. You have seen leaders praised and later judged. You understand that authority without conscience becomes danger. When I say that every great African leader must kneel before the Creator, I am not speaking about religious performance. I am not speaking about rituals meant to impress crowds. I am speaking about the foundation of power. Africa has produced men who stood tall before empires, men who refused to bow before foreign pressure, men who faced prison, exile, and death. But only those who knew how to bow before God were able to stand firm before history. Power is intoxicating. It whispers that you are necessary. It convinces you that without you, everything collapses. It tempts you to believe that you are larger than the nation you serve. As a soldier, I learned something simple. A man who believes he cannot fall is already on the ground. A commander who refuses correction endangers his own troops. A leader who forgets his limits invites disaster. Africa is in a moment of turbulence. The Sahel is unstable. International pressures are real. Our people demand dignity, security, sovereignty. In such a time, the temptation is to tighten your fist and claim control. But control without moral grounding becomes oppression. When I kneel before the Creator, I remind myself that I am temporary. My authority is temporary. My title is temporary. Responsibility is real, but permanence is illusion. Some leaders believe kneeling makes them weak. I believe it protects them from becoming tyrants. This is the story I want to tell. Not of conquest, not of ideology, but of conscience. I will speak plainly. I will speak as a man entrusted with responsibility in a difficult hour, and I will explain why I believe Africa does not need louder leaders but humbler ones. When I first understood that I might be entrusted with leading my nation, I did not feel triumph. I felt weight. Power does not arrive like celebration. It arrives like a responsibility that presses against your chest in the silence of the night. Those who have governed know this feeling. Those who have carried families, businesses, churches, or communities understand it as well. Today I may hold authority. Tomorrow history may change its direction. Africa has seen this too many times. We have seen leaders cheered in the morning and removed in the evening. We have seen uniforms praised and then condemned. We have seen men believe their rule would last for generations only to discover that time humbles everyone. This is not a uniquely African lesson. It is a human one. Nelson Mandela once said, "I am not a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying." He understood something profound. Power did not make him holy. It did not make him infallible. It did not make him beyond correction. He spent decades in prison. He emerged not claiming perfection, but admitting effort. That humility preserved his moral authority long after his presidency ended. When I kneel before the Creator, I am acknowledging that I am not permanent. My office is not eternal. My decisions will be judged. My name may be praised or criticized. But above me stands something higher than the applause of crowds or the pressure of foreign governments. There is a danger when leaders begin to believe they are indispensable. They start to interpret criticism as betrayal. They treat opposition as enemies of the state. They silence dissent because they fear irrelevance. History has never been kind to such leaders. The belief in invincibility is the beginning of collapse. In Africa, we have witnessed leaders who assumed their power was untouchable. They rewrote constitutions. They surrounded themselves with loyalists who never questioned them. They isolated themselves from ordinary citizens. At first, it appeared strong. But strength without humility becomes brittle. When I kneel, I remind myself that I did not create Burkina Faso, I inherited responsibility for it. I am a steward, not an owner. This distinction matters. An owner defends property for personal gain. A steward protects what belongs to future generations. If I believe that my authority defines my worth, then losing authority would destroy me. But if my worth is anchored in something beyond office, then I can lead without desperation. Many of you who are watching, especially those who have lived long lives, know this truth from experience. Careers end, positions change, titles disappear. What remains is character. Power is a temporary assignment. Some leaders fear this thought. I find peace in it. Because if power is temporary, then I do not have to cling to it at any cost. I do not have to sacrifice conscience to preserve position. I do not have to betray principles to extend tenure. When a leader forgets that his time is limited, he begins to act as though consequences do not apply to him. But consequences are patient. They arrive eventually. Kneeling before the Creator is my way of acknowledging accountability beyond elections, beyond military strength, beyond international approval. It is a reminder that I will answer not only to voters, not only to history books, but to God. This thought does not weaken my resolve, it sharpens it. Because when you know your time is limited, you govern with urgency but also with restraint. You build instead of exploiting. You prepare successors instead of eliminating them. You strengthen institutions instead of weakening them. Temporary power demands permanent integrity. I do not fear the end of my presidency. I fear leading without moral clarity during it. That is why I kneel. Not because I am forced to, not because it is expected, but because I understand that without humility, power consumes the one who holds it. Africa does not need leaders who think they will live forever in office. Africa needs leaders who understand they will leave and who prepare the nation for that day. The core message is simple. Power is never eternal, and the leader who forgets this becomes a danger to his own people. After understanding that power is temporary, the next question becomes even more important. What is it for? I did not step into leadership to dominate. I did not accept responsibility to rule over people as though they were possessions. Authority without service becomes control, and control without conscience becomes oppression. There is a difference between ruling and serving. A ruler demands obedience to preserve his image. A servant leader accepts responsibility to protect his people. The difference may appear subtle, but history proves it is decisive. Julius Nyerere understood this well. He lived simply. He spoke often about leadership as teaching, not commanding. He described the leader as a teacher of the nation. That phrase carries weight. A teacher does not own his students. He guides them. He prepares them. He hopes they will surpass him. When I kneel before the Creator, I remind myself that I am not the owner of Burkina Faso. I do not possess its land. I do not possess its people. I am entrusted with its care. There is a great temptation in leadership to believe that national resources exist for personal comfort. Luxury seduces quickly. Privilege isolates slowly. Soon, a leader no longer sees the daily struggles of ordinary citizens. And once that distance grows, compassion shrinks. I have seen how easily leadership can transform into entitlement. Vehicles become larger, houses become grander, security becomes heavier, and the leader begins to feel separated from those he serves. But separation breeds misunderstanding. A leader who dominates fears the people. A leader who serves walks among them. When a leader views authority as ownership, criticism feels like rebellion. When authority is understood as stewardship, criticism becomes feedback. Kneeling is my way of correcting my posture before I stand before my nation. It reminds me that sovereignty belongs to the people. I am entrusted with administration, not possession. In Africa, we have experienced both models. We have known leaders who spoke the language of liberation but practiced domination. They demanded loyalty while silencing dissent. They equated disagreement with betrayal. Such leadership may last for a season. It may even appear strong, but it erodes trust. Trust is the true foundation of stability. A leader who serves will be defended by his people in difficult times. A leader who dominates will be abandoned when pressure comes. Service is not weakness. It requires strength to put others first. It requires discipline to resist indulgence. It requires courage to listen to voices that disagree with you. When I kneel, I am reminding myself that I will one day answer for how I use the authority entrusted to me. Did I use it to enrich myself or to strengthen institutions? Did I silence critics or did I strengthen dialogue? Did I build dependency? Or did I empower citizens? These are not theoretical questions. They are daily decisions. Many of you who are watching from the United States or the United Kingdom understand this principle deeply. Your own political traditions wrestle constantly with a balance between authority and accountability. No nation is immune from the temptation of domination. But Africa, in particular, cannot afford leaders who confuse liberation with control. We have fought too hard for dignity to recreate oppression in another form. Kneeling does not reduce my authority, it purifies its purpose. It reminds me that leadership is not about being feared. It is about being trusted. And trust cannot be forced. It is earned through service. The core message is this: leadership is not domination, it is stewardship. And only those who understand this can build lasting stability. There is something dangerous about authority that few people speak about openly. It changes the atmosphere around you. When you become a leader, people speak differently in your presence. They agree more quickly. They laugh louder at your jokes. They hesitate before offering correction. Slowly, without noticing, you begin to live inside an echo chamber. And pride grows quietly in such rooms. Power does not corrupt only through money or force. It corrupts through isolation. When no one challenges you, you begin to believe you are always right. When no one contradicts you, you assume your judgment is superior. That is how pride enters. Thomas Sankara understood this danger. He rejected excessive privileges. He refused luxury that separated him from ordinary citizens. He rode modest vehicles. He encouraged accountability. He understood that once a leader sees himself as special, he begins to treat himself as above the law. Humility is not weakness, it is protection. Pride makes leaders reckless. Humility makes them cautious. Empires have fallen not because they lacked weapons, but because they were blinded by arrogance. Leaders have collapsed not because they lacked intelligence, but because they stopped listening. When I kneel before the Creator, I am confronting my own limitations. I am reminding myself that I can make mistakes, that I can misjudge situations, that I can misunderstand intentions. Kneeling forces me to acknowledge that I am human. Without that reminder, pride grows. Pride convinces a leader that he is the solution to every problem. Humility recognizes that leadership is collective, that wisdom comes from many voices, that even critics may carry truth. In times of instability, pride becomes especially dangerous. When threats surround you, it is easy to adopt a posture of defiance in every direction. It is easy to interpret disagreement as sabotage. It is easy to respond with force instead of reflection. But humility creates space for discernment. I lead during a difficult period for the Sahel. Security challenges exist, international pressures exist, internal frustrations exist. In such an environment, pride would push me toward rigidity. Humility pushes me toward listening. When a leader refuses humility, he begins to believe he embodies the nation. He merges his identity with the state. Criticism of him becomes, in his mind, criticism of the country. That confusion is dangerous. A nation is larger than any one man. Kneeling separates my identity from my office. It reminds me that I am a temporary servant of a permanent people. Humility also guards against revenge. Leaders are criticized, sometimes unfairly, sometimes harshly. Pride demands retaliation. Humility absorbs criticism without immediate reaction. This does not mean tolerating injustice. It means responding with measured judgment instead of wounded ego. Many of you who have lived long lives know this principle from family and community leadership. The strongest father is not the loudest. The wisest elder is not the most aggressive. Authority grounded in humility commands deeper respect. Pride seeks admiration. Humility seeks responsibility. Africa's future cannot be built on wounded egos. It must be built on disciplined conscience. Kneeling is not theatrical for me, it is corrective. It recalibrates my perspective before decisions are made. It reminds me that I do not possess all wisdom. It keeps me from confusing authority with superiority. History has shown repeatedly that arrogance precedes downfall. Humility sustains endurance. The core message is this: pride destroys leaders from within, but humility shields them from self-destruction. No leader governs in isolation from history. When I stand before my people, I am aware that I am not the first to carry authority in Africa. Many have stood where I stand. Some are remembered with honor. Others are remembered with regret. History is not abstract. It is a teacher. Africa has known extraordinary courage. It has known liberation movements that broke colonial chains. It has known men and women who sacrificed comfort for dignity. But it has also known leaders who placed themselves above law and morality. And history remembers both. We have seen what happens when authority escapes ethical restraint. We have seen leaders who began with popular support but slowly reshaped systems to secure personal control. Constitutions were altered. Opposition was suppressed. Institutions weakened. Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe offers a serious lesson. His early leadership inspired hope. His later years revealed how power, when unbalanced by principle, can generate crisis. This is not spoken to condemn a man. It is spoken to acknowledge a pattern. When power is not checked by moral boundaries, decline follows. No military strength can compensate for a decaying conscience. No security apparatus can permanently silence economic collapse. No propaganda can erase lived reality. Africa's history teaches us that sovereignty without integrity becomes fragile. Some leaders believe that controlling the narrative was enough, but citizens experience truth daily. They know when justice erodes. They know when fairness disappears. They know when fear replaces trust. A leader may temporarily silence dissent, but he cannot silence consequences. When I kneel before the Creator, I am acknowledging that history watches, not the history written in speeches, not the history shaped by political alliances, but the deeper history recorded in the lives of ordinary people. What will mothers say about my leadership? What will farmers remember? What will teachers and soldiers carry in their memory? Those testimonies matter more than titles. Africa does not need leaders who escape accountability. It needs leaders who accept it. History has also shown that leaders who preserved moral standards endure beyond office. Their names remain symbols of dignity. Those who abandon ethics to secure power often leave behind division. I study history not to glorify the past, but to avoid repeating its errors. One of the greatest mistakes a leader can make is to assume that he is different from those who failed before him. That confidence blinds him to warning signs. Every leader believes his situation is unique, but human weakness remains constant. That is why moral grounding matters. When authority is exercised without reference to higher principle, it becomes self-justifying. Every action is defended, every decision rationalized. Slowly, ethical compromise becomes normal. Kneeling interrupts that process. It forces reflection before action. It invites examination before declaration. It reminds me that even popular support does not equal moral correctness. History has punished leaders who confused applause with righteousness. I do not want Burkina Faso to become another chapter of regret. The Sahel has suffered enough instability. Our people deserve governance anchored in conscience. History will not be persuaded by rhetoric. It will judge outcomes. The core message is this: African history proves that power without moral discipline leads to decline, and only leaders anchored in principle endure with honor. There is something many people misunderstand about leadership. They think leaders do not feel fear. They imagine that authority removes uncertainty, that titles eliminate doubt, that strength means absence of anxiety. This is not true. Leadership in a time of instability brings pressure that few can fully describe. Security threats, economic strain, diplomatic tension, internal criticism, external expectation. Every decision carries consequences. Some nights are long. In those moments, pride offers one response: pretend you are unshaken. Display confidence even when questions remain. Silence vulnerability. Project invincibility. But pretending does not remove fear, it only buries it. Abraham Lincoln once said, "I have been driven many times to my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I had nowhere else to go." That statement reveals something profound. One of the most tested leaders in history admitted that responsibility forced him into humility. Not weakness, humility. There are moments in leadership when strategy is not enough. Intelligence reports are not enough. Military preparation is not enough. Even consultation is not enough. You reach a point where you understand the limits of your control. It is there that faith becomes more than belief. It becomes refuge. When I kneel before the Creator, I am not performing for cameras. I am seeking clarity beyond politics. Fear in leadership can take many forms. Fear of failure, fear of losing support, fear of miscalculation, fear of consequences that affect millions. If fear is not anchored, it distorts judgment. Some leaders respond to fear with aggression. They overreact, they silence, they strike preemptively. Fear masquerades as strength. Others respond to fear with paralysis. They delay decisions, they avoid responsibility, they hope problems resolve themselves. Faith does not eliminate fear. It places it in perspective. When I kneel, I remind myself that ultimate authority does not belong to me, that the fate of nations does not rest solely on my shoulders, that I am responsible but not omnipotent. This releases something important. It frees me from the desperation to control everything. A leader who does not fear God will constantly fear other powers. He will fear foreign governments. He will fear rival factions. He will fear criticism. He will fear losing influence. But when you recognize a higher authority, other fears lose their dominance. That does not make you reckless. It makes you steady. Faith provides inner stillness in moments of external turbulence. Many of you watching, especially those who have walked with God for decades, understand this deeply. You have faced illness, loss, uncertainty. You have discovered that kneeling in prayer brings a calm that arguments cannot provide. Leadership is not immune from that human need. The Sahel is complex. Burkina Faso faces challenges. I cannot deny that. But panic does not solve complexity. Ego does not defeat instability. Clarity does, and clarity often emerges in silence before God. Faith also restrains vengeance. When confronted by hostility, a leader must decide whether to respond from wounded pride or principled judgment. Prayer creates space between emotion and action. That space can prevent catastrophe. Some assume that faith in politics is manipulation. It can be if misused, but genuine faith disciplines the leader more than it empowers him. It reminds him that he is accountable not only for results, but for methods. It reminds him that ends do not justify unjust means. It reminds him that moral compromise to escape fear leads to greater instability. The courage that comes from faith is not loud, it is quiet and consistent. It does not need constant validation. When I kneel, I do not ask for dominance, I ask for wisdom. I do not ask for personal survival. I ask for clarity to serve rightly. Fear will always exist in leadership, but fear does not have to control leadership. The core message is this: faith does not remove fear, but it anchors the leader so that fear does not distort his decisions. When people speak of sovereignty, they often think first of borders. They think of armies, they think of airspace, they think of natural resources and economic independence. These are important. No nation can survive without protecting its territory or managing its economy. But sovereignty is deeper than territory. A country may control its land and still lose its soul. Kwame Nkrumah spoke often about political independence. He believed Africa must stand on its own feet, free from external domination. Yet political independence alone is incomplete if moral independence is absent. If a nation frees itself from foreign rule but becomes captive to corruption, has it truly become sovereign? If leaders speak of national dignity while secretly betraying the public trust, is that dignity real? Sovereignty is not only about resisting external pressure, it is about resisting internal decay. When I kneel before the Creator, I am acknowledging that true independence begins within the conscience of the leader. If I lose moral clarity, I have already compromised national strength. Even if the army is strong, even if alliances are favorable, even if resources are abundant, because corruption weakens institutions faster than invasion. A nation cannot demand respect abroad if it tolerates injustice at home. This is not theory. It is observable reality. Countries collapse not only because of foreign aggression, but because of internal erosion. Trust erodes. Accountability weakens. Systems bend under personal interest. Then sovereignty becomes a slogan instead of substance. Burkina Faso, like many nations in the Sahel, seeks to assert its independence in a complex international environment. Decisions must be made about partnerships, security arrangements, and economic paths. But if those decisions are driven by ego or personal benefit rather than national conscience, sovereignty becomes performative. Kneeling reminds me that I must answer for how sovereignty is exercised. Am I strengthening institutions that will outlast me? Or am I centralizing authority in ways that weaken them? Am I promoting justice equally or selectively? Am I protecting national resources for future generations or allowing them to be exploited for immediate gain? Sovereignty without morality is fragile. It may look strong on the surface. Flags wave, speeches are delivered, agreements are signed. But beneath the surface, instability grows. A morally grounded nation can withstand external pressure. An ethically compromised nation is vulnerable to manipulation. Some believe that morality slows progress, that ethical restraint makes a country less competitive. I believe the opposite. Moral clarity builds durable progress. Investors trust transparency. Citizens support fairness. Soldiers defend leaders they respect. Institutions function when rules apply equally. When morality declines, suspicion increases. Cynicism spreads. Loyalty weakens. No army can compensate for lost trust. When I kneel before the Creator, I am committing to protect not just the borders of Burkina Faso, but its moral direction. I am reminding myself that sovereignty is stewardship, and stewardship requires integrity. Many of you watching from Western nations have witnessed debates about national identity, constitutional order, and moral values. These discussions are not uniquely African. They are universal. But in regions like the Sahel, where instability has been acute, moral leadership becomes even more critical because fragile systems cannot survive ethical collapse. If I compromise my conscience to gain temporary advantage, I may secure short-term applause, but I weaken long-term sovereignty. Killing is a declaration that no political calculation is worth abandoning moral principle. It is a reminder that freedom without righteousness becomes chaos, and order without justice becomes oppression. True sovereignty balances strength with conscience. The core message is this: a nation's independence is secured not only by military or economic power, but by the moral integrity of those who lead it. Africa is not a continent of one voice. It is a continent of many prayers. In my country alone, you will find Muslims bowing toward Mecca, Christians kneeling in churches, and families honoring ancestral traditions passed down for generations. Across the Sahel, faith is not an accessory to life. It is woven into daily existence. This diversity can be strength. It can also be manipulated. History shows that religion can unite, but it can also divide when used as a political instrument. Leaders who exploit faith for power create fractures that last generations. I refuse that path. When I kneel before the Creator, I am not declaring superiority of one faith over another. I am acknowledging that authentic belief, whatever its tradition, calls the human heart toward humility, justice, and accountability. Desmond Tutu understood this deeply during the painful years after apartheid. He used his Christian faith not to punish, but to reconcile. He did not deny injustice, he confronted it, but he insisted that healing required moral courage rooted in belief. Faith, when genuine, restrains hatred. It reminds us that dignity belongs to every human being. Africa cannot afford religious division. The Sahel cannot survive sectarian hostility. Our security challenges are already complex. Adding spiritual conflict would deepen instability. Some leaders have used religion to solidify their base. They speak as defenders of one community against another. That approach may produce short-term loyalty, but it weakens national unity. A nation divided by faith cannot stand firmly against external threats. When I kneel, I do so in a way that respects every sincere believer in my country. To my Muslim brothers and sisters, I respect your devotion and your discipline. To my Christian brothers and sisters, I honor your faith in Christ and your commitment to service. To those who follow ancestral traditions, I acknowledge your heritage and cultural roots. Leadership must protect all. If I favor one at the expense of another, I betray my responsibility. Religious unity does not mean theological agreement. It means mutual respect and a shared citizenship. The Creator does not require me to weaponize belief. He requires me to act justly. Many of you watching from the United States or the United Kingdom understand how religious pluralism can either strengthen or strain a society. You have seen moments of cooperation and moments of tension. Africa's path must be guided carefully. When a leader publicly humbles himself before God, he signals something important. He signals that authority is not ultimate, that no human ideology sits above moral law. But he must never use that humility to exclude others. In Burkina Faso, Muslims and Christians have historically lived side by side. That coexistence is precious. It must not be sacrificed for political gain. Faith should inspire compassion, not coercion. It should call leaders to service, not supremacy. If I claim to kneel before the Creator yet treat a portion of my citizens as less worthy, my kneeling is false. Authentic humility produces inclusive governance. The Sahel needs cooperation across religious lines to address insecurity, poverty, and development. Dividing along spiritual boundaries only multiplies weakness. Kneeling before God reminds me that every citizen is created with dignity. It reminds me that justice must be impartial. It reminds me that leadership must bridge differences, not exploit them. Africa's strength lies in its spiritual depth, but that depth must translate into moral unity, not sectarian rivalry. The core message is this: faith should unite a nation through humility and justice, not divide it through political manipulation. There will come a day when I no longer hold this office. That is not pessimism, it is reality. No presidency lasts forever. No military authority endures without limit. One day, another name will stand where mine stands now. Another voice will address the nation. Another leader will carry the weight I carry today. The question is not whether that day will come. The question is what I will leave behind when it does. Nelson Mandela made a decision that surprised many observers. After one term, he stepped aside. He could have remained. He had global admiration. He had moral authority. But he understood that institutions matter more than personalities. He chose principle over permanence. That decision strengthened democracy. When I think about the future of Burkina Faso, I do not think only about immediate stability. I think about the children who are growing up now. I think about the soldiers who are young recruits today and may become commanders tomorrow. I think about teachers, farmers, entrepreneurs, and families who will live with the consequences of today's decisions long after I am gone. Leadership is not only about the present, it is about inheritance. If I cling to power at the expense of institutions, I weaken the nation's future. If I concentrate authority around myself, I create fragility when I leave. Kneeling before the Creator reminds me that I am accountable not only to current citizens, but to generations yet unborn. History is not only written in textbooks, it is written in opportunity. Will the next generation inherit stronger systems or unresolved conflict? Will they inherit functioning institutions or dependence on personalities? These are the questions that shape responsible leadership. Some leaders fear succession. They treat potential successors as threats. They weaken institutions to ensure personal control. They modify systems to extend tenure. But that approach plants instability. A nation that cannot transition leadership peacefully is a nation at risk. I do not want to be remembered for holding power. I want to be remembered for strengthening the country during the time I held it. There is a difference. One seeks legacy through duration, the other seeks legacy through integrity. When I kneel today, I am preventing myself from bowing later in shame. Shame comes when a leader looks back and sees compromise, when he recognizes that fear or pride drove decisions, when he understands that he sacrificed long-term good for short-term security. I do not want that burden. I would rather leave office with criticism than leave history with dishonor. Africa has experienced leaders who remained too long. It has also experienced leaders who stepped aside with dignity. The contrast is clear. Those who leave at the right time preserve respect. Those who refuse to leave often damage their own legacy. The Sahel needs stable succession models. It needs institutional continuity. It needs leadership transitions that strengthen confidence rather than ignite crisis. If I truly believe that power is temporary, then I must govern in a way that prepares for its transfer. That means building systems, not personality cults. That means encouraging capable leadership around me, not eliminating it. That means valuing principle over ego. Many of you watching, especially those who have lived through political transitions in your own nations, understand how important this is. Peaceful transfer of authority is one of the greatest signs of political maturity. Kneeling reminds me that I am not indispensable. And that is liberating, because if I am not indispensable, then my task is to make the nation strong enough to thrive without me. The core message is this: true leadership prepares for its own end by strengthening institutions so that history remembers integrity rather than attachment to power. Weapons can defend borders. Economic policy can build infrastructure. Diplomacy can secure alliances. But none of these can substitute for the moral character of the one who leads. A nation may possess strong defenses and still decay internally. It may build roads and bridges while trust collapses. It may sign agreements while corruption quietly spreads. The invisible dimension of leadership is the most decisive. Africa has seen leaders with charisma but no conscience. It has seen leaders with strength but no restraint. It has seen leaders who spoke of sovereignty while neglecting justice. The results have not been stability. Thomas Sankara placed moral reform at the center of his leadership. Julius Nyerere emphasized ethical responsibility. They were not perfect men. No leader is, but they understood that the soul of leadership matters. When moral clarity disappears, governance becomes transactional. Decisions are measured only by gain. Loyalty is purchased, truth becomes flexible, justice becomes selective. Over time, cynicism replaces hope. I believe Africa does not primarily suffer from lack of resources. It suffers from inconsistent moral leadership. We have talent, we have youth, we have land and energy, but without ethical guidance at the top, potential becomes frustration. A leader without a moral compass will eventually demand that his people bow before injustice. If he does not kneel before the Creator, he may force citizens to kneel before his ego. That is not strength. That is insecurity disguised as authority. A leader anchored in conscience does not need to coerce respect. Integrity commands it naturally. When I kneel, I am guarding against becoming disconnected from the moral weight of my office. I am reminding myself that my decisions affect real lives, that policies are not abstract, that every order carries human consequences. The Sahel's challenges are serious. Security threats require firmness. Economic hardship requires strategy. International negotiation requires resolve. But firmness without conscience becomes brutality. Strategy without ethics becomes exploitation. Resolve without humility becomes rigidity. Africa's future depends not only on development plans, but on the interior lives of its leaders. Do they fear God? Do they respect human dignity? Do they restrain their own ambition for the sake of national good? These questions matter more than speeches. I speak especially to older viewers who have witnessed decades of political change. You have seen the pattern. Strong beginnings, gradual compromise, defensive posture, collapse of trust. It does not have to repeat. Leadership with a soul changes trajectory. It builds institutions instead of monuments to ego. It strengthens justice instead of rewarding loyalty. It values truth even when truth is uncomfortable. When I say that every great African leader must kneel before the Creator, I mean this. Without moral anchoring, power becomes dangerous. With moral anchoring, power becomes service. Africa does not need louder voices. It needs steadier hearts. The core message is this. The future of Africa depends not only on power or policy, but on leaders whose souls are disciplined by humility and guided by conscience. We have now reflected on power, service, humility, history, faith, sovereignty, unity, responsibility, and moral character. If you have listened this far, then you understand that I have not spoken about strategy or military plans. I have spoken about conscience. I have spoken as a soldier who found himself entrusted with national responsibility in a time of instability. I have spoken as a man aware that authority can either protect or corrupt. And I have spoken as someone who believes that Africa's future will not be secured by force alone, but by moral clarity. The world is watching the Sahel. Some watch with skepticism, some watch with concern, some watch with hope. But beyond political analysis, there is a deeper question. What kind of leadership will define this era? Will it be leadership driven by pride, insecurity, and attachment to power, or leadership grounded in humility, accountability, and faith? I do not claim perfection. I do not claim to be beyond error. But I claim this: I understand the danger of unrestrained power. I understand that without kneeling before the Creator, a leader may eventually demand that others kneel before him. That path leads to fear. The alternative leads to dignity. To my Muslim brothers and sisters, I say, let your devotion produce justice and patience in public life. Let it guide your conduct beyond ritual. To my Christian brothers and sisters, especially those who hold fast to the teachings of Jesus, remember that true authority is expressed through service. Christ washed feet. He did not demand a throne. To leaders across the Sahel and across Africa, I say this respectfully. We carry more than titles. We carry the hopes of millions. Let us not betray those hopes by confusing control with leadership. To viewers in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and across the Western world who care about moral leadership, understand that Africa's struggle is not separate from yours. Every nation wrestles with pride, division, and temptation in power. The need for integrity is universal. The world does not need perfect leaders. It needs accountable ones. Africa does not need leaders who never fall. It needs leaders who recognize when they might fall and correct themselves. I believe in an Africa that stands confidently among nations, not as a victim, not as a subordinate, but as a responsible partner. But that confidence must be anchored in conscience. I believe in a Sahel that is secure, not only because of weapons, but because of unity. I believe in Burkina Faso not only as territory, but as a people deserving justice and dignity. And I believe that every leader who fears God more than public opinion will govern with steadier hands. If you are listening and you feel disillusioned by politics, do not surrender to cynicism. Demand moral clarity, encourage humility, support leaders who demonstrate restraint rather than arrogance. If you are a leader in your own sphere, in your family, your church, your community, remember that authority begins with self-discipline. Turn away from pride. Turn away from exploitation. Turn away from hatred disguised as strength. Return to conscience. Return to humility. Return to reverence for the Creator. Because societies collapse gradually when leaders abandon moral boundaries. But societies heal when individuals choose integrity. I do not know how history will judge my time in office, but I know how I intend to stand before God. Not as a man who clung to power at any cost. Not as a man who used faith to divide, but as a servant who understood that kneeling before the Creator was the beginning of responsible leadership. If this message resonates with you, continue the conversation, reflect on it, share your thoughts, encourage dialogue rooted in respect rather than hostility. Support platforms that value serious discussion about faith and leadership. And if you believe these reflections are worth hearing again, follow this channel so that we can continue exploring the deeper questions behind power and responsibility. The future of Africa will not be determined only by politics. It will be determined by the character of those who lead and by the courage of citizens who demand integrity. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. These things I speak are true.